Okay, now this problem is asking us to factor completely. Whenever I need to factor, I first ask myself, is there a greatest common factor? Meaning, is there any one thing or any term that I can take out of every single term here? And I always start with my letters. So I look for, there's a T in this one. There's actually 3 of them. T, T. This one doesn't have a T, so I can't take a T out of everything. And then I look at the numbers. 8, 12, negative 12, 6, and negative 9. There's no number that will go into all of them. 2 would go into 8, 12, and 6, but it won't go into 9. And 3 won't go into 8, so there's no greatest common factor. So I'm just going to start looking at the whole problem. And when I have to factor, different factoring rules for different number of terms, and in this case I count my terms, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 terms, which tells me I'm going to be factoring this by grouping, meaning I'm going to break it into 2 groups of 2 terms. So I'm going to first look at these 2 terms, and then I'm going to look at these 2 terms afterwards. Okay, so I start by looking at just the first 2 terms, and I'm going to be factoring out a GCF of just those 2 terms. So I look at for the letter that they share in common, which is a T, and I look for the lowest exponent on the letter, because that's what's going to be in common to both of them. So this is 3 of them. This one only has 2, so there's T squared is going to be taken out. Then I look at the coefficients. What's the biggest number that can go into both 8 and 12 evenly? And in this case, that would be 4. Now, if I'm looking for a number and I don't recognize the numbers, I can always go off to the side and write my factors of everything. So if I was looking for that, I'd go 8, and it's 1 times 8, 2 times 4, 3 doesn't go in, and I'd be back to 4, so that's all the factors of 8. I'm looking at 12. In this case, it's really a negative 12, but I'm just going to look at the coefficient. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and there's no number in between 3 and 4, so I'm looking for, I know I've got all my factors down, and if I look, 4 is the only number that both factor lists carry. Okay, so going back to my problem, I'm really thinking I'm going to divide this out of every single term. So I make my parentheses, and I can think right in here that I'm dividing this by 4t squared. So, and I'm going to be dividing this one by 4t squared. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. There's 3 t's on top of this fraction, and 2 I'm taking away or dividing out. So there's 1 t left. I can put the 1 up there if I need to remind myself that there's 1 t. And then I'm thinking a negative divided by a positive, because it's a positive 4t, is negative, so minus. 12 divided by 4 is 3. I have 2 t's on top, 2 t's on bottom. They'll cancel out, and that's that for that. And then I move on to the next set of 2 terms. Whatever sign is on this term right here, I need to bring that down, because that's going to be the sign of my GCF. So I bring down my plus. And I'm needing to find the biggest number that goes into both 6 and 9. I don't worry about the t's because this one didn't have a t, so I couldn't take the t out. So the biggest number that goes into both 6 and 9 evenly is a 3. Remember, yet again, if it's numbers that you're not familiar with, you can always write down your factor pairs and find the biggest number that's in common to both of them. So in this case, I'm dividing everything by a positive 3. So divide by 3. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. Don't forget you have that t there. A negative divided by a positive is negative. And 9 divided by 3 is still 3. Okay, now where we're at with the problem is we should notice that our 2 sets of parentheses match. This one has the 1 on the t, which is the same thing. I don't need to have it written, so I can erase that right there. If your parentheses don't match, probably there's a sign thing, or you picked out the wrong GCF. So just look back at the 2 of them and make sure that you have the biggest number that you can pull out. So what I'm going to do is now I'm looking at just these. I've got 2 terms, this term, and I'm really looking at what's the GCF of those 2 terms. And if you notice, since the parentheses match, that's my GCF. So I'm going to write that down first. Okay. And remember, I'm factoring it out of both of them. So I'm really thinking that if this is gone and this is gone, because I've written it here, it's in common to both of them, what would be left? And I'm going to put that in its own set of parentheses. And I see there's a 4t squared. I've got a plus and a 3. And I always have to double check that I don't have anything else that I can factor. So since these are 2 terms, I check to make sure I don't have a difference of 2 squares. This is a perfect square, This is not a perfect square, and I don't have a minus sign, so I can't do anything more with that. And I look here, this isn't a perfect square, even though I have a minus sign, and that's not a perfect square, so I'm completely factored. I can't do anything else with this problem.